Lately, I've been thinking about our lives as our testimony. And, testimonies can be a really powerful thing. But we also have to recognize that in a world where we seek and find, literally, when we want validation, all we have to do is ask for validation and we will get validation. We surround ourselves with the people, the books, the experiences, everything that will validate what we already believe to be true. That's the big shifting between a real testimony and a testimony that is simply the propagation of a type or a system of thought. You take a person, for instance, who in Africa, there's a man who was like a terrorist. He killed people. He was a brutal, horrible expression of everything fearful and destructive in human qualities. And he had a spiritual event that changed him, and now he is a preacher who goes around Africa teaching the spirit of Christ, which is love and compassion and mercy and grace. His testimony is strong because he is a living example of somebody who lived a certain type of lifestyle, who when faced with himself and faced with the truth and faced with a new way of thinking, chose to rise up and to be a living example of the peace and the joy and all the good things we can be as human beings when we think as perfectly as we can. So the testimony itself is very strong. You have a person who, they get up and they give their testimony, and it is something that they were taught to say, and it's something that validates the system. When really what they're saying is, I was born into a happy family of parents who loved each other and had a financial stability. They had education. They had all those things, and I am just the same as they are. I am a person who is seeking to be with someone I can love, have children with, and have financial stability, and educated myself so I can set an example for my children. So they're passing on the propagation of a good lifestyle. That's great. However, that testimony in of itself does not show a lot of progress. It shows a lot of simple maintenance of what has always been. And the harsh reality is that there are people today struggling with various addictions and negative destructive thought patterns, who are making these astronomical leaps and bounds in their personal testimony because they are starting to understand and see themselves differently. And so they're being able to stand up and say, okay, I was conceived from parents who not only hated each other, were unfaithful to each other, but hated themselves desperately. Then, through the pregnancy, where I was in a womb, living the trauma of abusive language, abusive assaults on my body before it was even formed within my mother's body. I knew deprivation and neglect before I even took my first breath. I suffered for 10 months in a womb of a woman who lived in constant fear and neglect, rejection, isolation, abuse. My first breath came into a world where all I would ever know from that moment on was pain and suffering. Jesus suffered on the cross for about 24 hours at the most. There are people on the earth today who conceived in addiction and poverty, who spend, before they even take their first breath, an experience that formulates the very fabric of their entire life on fear. The adrenaline, fear, cortisone, all of those horrible chemicals that go into a body of fear is in that mother's blood and in her heart and in her mind, and it is just saturating that little unborn person with the normalcy of abuse, with the normalcy of fear, with the normalcy of lack. And then into a body where now, not being abused outside of themselves through the mother's filter, but actually suffering the verbal, physical, sexual neglect, abuse firsthand. And those people are coming to a realization because of some person who came into the life and said, you know what? It's not your fault that everything that you know is trauma and abuse, neglect, addiction, and poverty. And I'm going to love you. And you will say horrible things to me, and you will treat me badly, and you will abuse my love, and you will try everything you can to make me treat you the way that you think you should be treated. You will use me as a tool for your own abuse. And in spite of that, I will continue to love you, and patiently love you, and show you the light of an example where you don't have to live that life anymore. You can be reborn with a new kind of thinking, a thinking that says, I'm worthy of a better life. And these people are starting to grow up around us, and they are slowly receiving their inheritance as children of a divine creator, an inheritance that was taken from them in the fetus, in infancy, in childhood. And they are taking their testimony as a shining light of somebody who gave them unconditional love and giving it to others. And it's passing on, and it passes on, and it passes on, and it passes on. And their testimony is their life. And the life is that they didn't end their life, and they weren't killed by the trauma of their life. They were loved through the pain into a new life, a new name, a new type of being and understanding and translating the world. And the validation, they don't have to look for it. They are the living validation because they're still here. And they're choosing to think differently, feel differently, speak differently, act differently. And sometimes the way they speak and act may not be according to what a certain maintaining testimony would call quality, because maybe they use words and actions that have been labeled as bad, when really they're just the expressions of lack, rejection, isolation, poverty, being conditioned in a certain mindset of normalcy, of certain types of humor. It's not that anything about what they're saying or doing is bad. It's just all that they know right now. But as they continue to grow, these lights that are growing around our earth right now, these little beings that survived their conception and their infancy, they're here now to shine a new testimony. A testimony that says we can think and feel differently. We can be reborn. In a mind, what we think is what we feel is who we are, even if we don't act on it. There are people in prisons today who are in prisons because they acted on those thoughts and feelings. However, there's a whole bunch of billions of people out there who think like murderers and rapists and thieves, who feel those thoughts, who engage in that in an emotional sense. They feel it. They feel that rage that would allow them to murder somebody or rape somebody or steal from somebody. They lust and they covet. And they have all the same thoughts and feelings. The difference is they didn't have the courage to act on it. And therein is the only difference between the ones that are in prison and the ones who walk around free.